Hi everyone, this is Luke, and welcome back to ThursDev. This week, I came across a news article that was making the rounds in the games news space that sort of concerned and disappointed me because of how misleading it was. I know that alarmism in game journalism is nothing new, but I thought it would be worth addressing this not only because I want people to be educated about this sort of thing, but also because this information is sort of useful and interesting. The article in question was published in various iterations around August 22nd and states that the current game market punching bag No Man's Sky sales dropped off 81% in its second week, as though that's some sort of a concerning statistic. To many, this probably does seem like it might be some kind of a big deal. How does a game suddenly do so much worse in its second week of sales than the first? Shouldn't it be a gradual decline as the looky-loos eventually decide to buy the game or not? The short answer is no. Regardless of your personal feelings about the quality of the game in the wake of its release, No Man's Sky belongs to a very specific subset of sold games. It's a premium title that had no early access period. Pre-orders certainly existed, but nobody owned their copy of the game until its street date. Statistically, games that follow this model tend to make the lion's share of their profits in the first few days of sale, then quickly taper off until they're selling small amounts daily into the months following. This is acutely noticeable in the retail game space, since physical copies have the additional problem of being a limited resource. But in order to illustrate my point, I'm going to give you some numbers that should illustrate my point, even though they're digital. For the sake of simplicity, and so that you can also check statistics like this yourself, I'd like to use SteamSpy as our tool of choice for viewing analytics on game software sales for this video. It's not completely accurate data as it data mines Steam users' owned and recently played stats to get its numbers, but it's good enough for what we want to do today. So the first thing we should look at is the game in question, No Man's Sky. By many reports, it's a disappointment, and fine, people are entitled to their opinions, but how odd is the figure that its sales dropped so drastically beyond the first week? In order to ensure that we're getting data that's reliable, I'm going to exclude a few types of games. Early access titles just won't work for this exercise because they've been available for purchase long before their street date, and a lot of people already have the game in their hands. To this end, Starbound, for example, can't be used. Free-to-play games will also be excluded since they rely on a very different model of player acquisition than premium titles, which tend to front-load their PR leading up to release. I'm also excluding what I'm going to call viral titles. Games that have little actual promotion, but instead become hits due to some small but vocal user base that grows over time, accumulating more players. This is an organic user acquisition method that's strived for by many publishers, but it's not something that's predictable or all that common. In this case, we're going to specifically be looking at high-profile titles like No Man's Sky. Looking at the releases SteamSpy offers within the time frame available, I'm going to also grab Telltale's Batman and the semi-sequel to Kingdom called Kingdom New Lands. Also, let's look at 505's Abzu, I guess, as well as Total War Warhammer and a couple of other big titles like Inside and Necropolis. Looking at the numbers, SteamSpy has yet to gather data from No Man's Sky's day 12 to 14 dates, so the numbers we have out of SteamSpy are not yet complete. But the numbers given in the oft-quoted article from VG247 states that it's dropped by 81%, which I assume means that second week sales are 19% of that of week 1. So what about some other comparable high-profile premium titles? Telltale's Batman dropped 82% in its second week according to my math. Kingdom by a whopping 94%. Comparably, 505's Abzu is holding the line valiantly at dropping only 62%, but I bet that's even far higher than you might have thought, and if I gave you that statistic alone, might even seem really high. Among these, this must mean that Kingdom is doing terribly, except it really isn't. More likely the number of people who own the game now just already bought it if they're at all interested. It also stands to note that the game was comped to anyone who already owned Kingdom, so we should probably throw its numbers out, but let's keep it in there since we've already started talking about it. What about Batman though? Surely dropping 82% is pretty terrible. It's a percentage point higher than No Man's Sky's is after all. Well, let's look at some other high-profile titles. Total War Warhammer dropped 63% in week 2. Playdead's Inside dropped 74%. Necropolis by 80%. Some admittedly do well, but by no means is 80% a dismal decrease, or even a useful statistic, really. We certainly weren't hearing of these games as being failures, and honestly, even No Man's Sky's low numbers are higher than Abzu's on a good day. My largest regret in presenting this data as I am right now is that there aren't any significantly more high-profile games released on Steam with release dates in the range SteamSpy offers. But at least we can go by reported numbers. So why not go really big? Let's look at Grand Theft Auto 5. 20% of the total sales of Grand Theft Auto 5 for its first 6 months were made in the first 24 hours. If the quoted 16 million copies for the first week are to be believed, that means if generously the remaining 4.8 million copies after its 11.2 million selling on the first 24 hours were generated on the second day, that's still a 70% drop. Was Grand Theft Auto 5 a flop? You tell me, but if you say yes, I'd like to know why it still sells on average 1,000 copies a day 3 years later. All these numbers say at all is that the games with a hard release date get a large percentage of their sales in the first week. Of course the numbers are going to drop. The people who wanted the game and bought into the hype and pre-ordered or bought on day one all got it in the days immediately following its release. The cold, indifferent fact is that games always see a hard dip in their sales after the initial burst when its interest is high but availability is limited to a very specific date. The bigger the game, the more hype it produces, the sharper that curve becomes. And that stands to reason. This trend of enormous spikes in game sales has been the norm for at least the better part of a decade that I've had access to game sales analytics. That's the entire reason why video game, film, music, and any other number of entertainment media marketing campaigns focus so much on the hype leading up to a product's release. The cynics among you are going to say it's because it sells copies of games before there's any chance for players to actually play the game. But momentum always works this way with games. There's always a very narrow window for a game to make the largest possible profit. There are always going to be stragglers, but those who are interested will either pick the game up right away, or will wait and very likely pick something else up and forget about that game. Gamers are fickle. And especially in the days of retail, games only stayed on shelves for a certain amount of time before eventually they peter off and nobody can pick up the game anymore. This trend has just continued even in the digital age. The problem is that it's trendy to hate on No Man's Sky right now. It was overhyped and there were some number of issues of the game not meeting expectations, and yay, something for the internet to hate. And you know what, go right ahead, it's your prerogative as a denizen of the anonymous internet, but at least know what you're talking about when you quote analytics. I'd like to say that I expect better from game news sites, but I don't. Hell, even colleagues within game development are riding the hate train and quoting these numbers as though they mean anything. Really though, if you're going to criticize something about a game like No Man's Sky, seeing no sales peak at all would have been the most damning figure. And there are other things that you can say if you even care that much. You're at least well within your rights to criticize the abysmal communication from Sony and Hello Games about the game's launch features. I was. There was genuinely a large number of things shown and taken as fact that didn't make it into the final product that people understandably wonder about. It doesn't really bother me, these things just happen, but at least that's a valid criticism. But waving around a graph or two at people in an attempt to win an argument by intimidation factor of data, cherry-picked and without context to back your argument, is disingenuous. If you must do it, at least make an argument that can't be picked apart with some very simple analysis of your numbers. And that's it for me for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, we do more of these every week, so I hope that you'll come back. If you're interested, there's a subscribe button that you can hit. Otherwise, I just hope to see you around again soon. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.